Dr. Booten Foster?
Yes.
Yes, he's asked you to begin.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Dr. Lester is going to get us started. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to Campus Conversations. I am Dr. Ren Lester, the Chief Experience Officer at UHB. We're launching a series of events that will provide a forum for questions and answers called Campus Conversations around the COVID-19 vaccine. Over the next several weeks, we will be hosting several virtual meetings that will align with the governor's plans for rollout. We are starting with our frontline workers here at SUNY Downstate. Today is the first session. We have some of our senior leaders and infectious disease experts who will provide information on the COVID-19 vaccine and take some of your questions. We really want to give you the latest, most evidence-based facts regarding the COVID-19 vaccine so you can make an informed decision for you and for your family. I'm excited to introduce our panel of experts. I will quickly list them out. They are Dr. David Berger, our Chief Executive Officer of UHB, Ms. Patricia Winston, our Senior Vice President of Hospital Operations, Dr. Rami Nakashbandi, Interim Chief Medical Officer, Ms. Cheryl Ralston, Interim Chief Nursing Officer, Dr. Moro Salafu, Chair of the Department of Medicine, Dr. Michael Augenbrand, Director, Division of Infectious Disease, and Dr. Christina Pardo, Vice Chair, Quality and Innovation, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Our panel this afternoon will be moderated by Dr. Carla Boutin Foster and Dr. Pamela Stryker. We will also be monitoring the chat and we'll get to as many of your questions as possible. So let's get started. Dr. Boutin Foster, please take us away.
Thank you, Dr. Lester. So our first question goes to Dr. Augenbrand. So Dr. Augenbrand, we'd like to know, what is the COVID vaccine and how does it differ from other vaccines? And specifically, if you can talk to us about the mRNA vaccines that are currently being used.
That's a good question. I would say that's probably one of the top issues in people's minds about this vaccine is that it is a relatively new format vaccine. That's not to say that people have never received this sort of thing before. It certainly has been in studies and it's been looked at in cancer chemotherapies, but in essence, what it does is it makes use of currently available molecular technology, which was not available 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and allows for the individual's own cells to make the material that is part of the virus against which the body will develop antibodies. So rather than giving the individual a virus or a piece of the virus, what this vaccine does is it inserts small sections of RNA, which is what translates genetic information into proteins so that the body's own cells can make the proteins that the body subsequently has to recognize as an invader. It doesn't produce new viruses, it produces pieces of the virus, which is how most vaccines work anyway. And again, this is something that I think has concerned people because it's a relatively new technology. We don't have other vaccines that make use of this platform, but this is really going to be the beginning of a new era of vaccinology. This is a safe and effective method. It can be ramped up quickly and quality control can be tremendous. So I think we're going to see more and more of this.
Thank you. And if I may add just two more questions. So I understand there are two vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccine. If you can tell us the difference between those vaccines, and also you talk about how our own cells and this is an mRNA vaccine. Do either of the vaccines change our DNA? Is that something that can you share some information about it?
Right. Yeah. So So mRNA doesn't enter the nucleus of the cell, so there's really no participation with DNA in this. So the idea that this could somehow change DNA is false. It doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, this material degrades rather quickly. And one of the reasons why, despite the fact that we've had some of the technology for years, that we haven't been able to actually make vaccines harnessing this technology until recently, is that the material is so prone to degradation by body enzymes that it's taken a while to figure out how to package the mRNA sufficiently and protectively enough so that you can get it into the cell so that it can do what it has to do. And so the manufacturers have been able to achieve this, and this is one of the reasons why we have this now effective vaccine. You asked about the differences between the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. Those are two of many vaccines which are coming online, but those are the two mRNA vaccines that are available. And the distinction between them is really sort of minor. They both make use, again, of the same format. They probably make use of very small variations in the actual material, the antigenic material that they produce through the use of the mRNA. And the way the mRNA is protected using fats and various materials like that so that it can get into the cell is different in minor ways. But for all intents and purposes, these vaccines seem to function much the same.
Thank you. Dr. Nakashbandi, there's been a lot of talk about vaccine development and clinical trials. And how, if you can share with us, how representative were the participants in these clinical trials? Do they resemble how many people of color, Black, Latinx, Indigenous people were involved in these trials? If you can share that information with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me for the panel. So there were close to 45,000 participants in the Pfizer vaccine trial, and more than 30,000 participants in the Moderna vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine trials were from around 150 sites all over the world, and the Moderna trials were from around 100 sites in the US. However, the trials from both vaccines involved minorities. And there were around 10% of the participants were Black or African American, and close to 25% of the participants were Hispanic. So both trials involved a high number of participants with representations from different minority groups, which we all know that they are more vulnerable for COVID-19 in terms of infection rate and complications. Also, I would like actually to say that minority scientists were also involved in the development of the vaccine. As an example, Dr. Corbett was in the forefront of the trial development, and going to be part of the history that she will be one of the key people in ending this pandemic.
Thank you. This is really helpful in helping us address the trust and making sure that this vaccine is safe and efficacious, which leads to the next question to Dr. Berger. So doctors Augenbraun and Dr. Nakashbandi talked about the vaccine mRNA and its development in clinical trials. Can you speak to the safety and efficacy of this vaccine or of these vaccines, and in particular among among recipients of the vaccine at SUNY Downstate? I'm sorry, Dr. Berger, we're not able to hear you. Great, thank you.
Across the world, there's been really high level of safety from the vaccine. And certainly from any vaccine that is taken, there is the possibility of side effects. So the most common side effects from this vaccine have been arm pain and arm swelling, some arm redness. Some people have had flu-like symptoms and fever for a short duration of time, but these have been really self-limited side effects, and the protection that's offered so far in most studies have been shown to be of long duration and really over 90% protection against getting COVID-19. And when you compare that to the flu vaccine, which is only about 50% protective, that is really an order of magnitude higher. If you look at our patient population, we vaccinated over 3,600 people in the downstate community in the last 4 weeks. And we only had one major reaction at the time of the vaccination, and that was someone who has a history of anaphylactic reactions to various other allergens, and they responded immediately to treatment and did not suffer any sequelae. We've had people that have reported that they have arm swelling, headaches, fever, and flu-like symptoms, but no one has sustained a major reaction to receiving the vaccine.
Thank you. So the recipient who had the allergic reaction is doing well now?
Yeah, they immediately recovered. They were treated immediately.
Okay.
They actually carried around their own EpiPen, so they self-administered, and they were well within a few minutes after that. So it's not a long duration reaction.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So our next series of questions will be moderated by Dr. Pamela Straker. Can't hear you, Dr. Straker.
We can't hear you.
There you go.
Good evening, everyone. Ms. Ralston, I still need to maintain social distancing after I take the vaccine.
Yes, you are. You still don't know about the virus, even if after you've had the vaccine, it will still be. So the best.
Okay, I believe Ms. Ralston said that we must continue to social distance, and so that's our response for that one. Do I still need to wear a mask at work after the vaccine?
Yes, you do. Again, because even though you may be protected, you're not sure that you will still not be able to transmit the virus to other people. So until those determinations are made, certainly you should continue wearing our masks.
Thank you. Dr. Pardo, if I am pregnant or planning to become pregnant in the near future, should I get the vaccine?
Yes, thank you for the important question and having this important discussion today. So I'll start by saying, first that as of right now, today, we are seeing that pregnant women do have an increased risk of becoming more sick from coronavirus. So this is a very important question. The guidance that I'm going to provide is from the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which provides all of our guidance for how we manage pregnant women. First, pregnant women should not be excluded from receiving the vaccination. And the recommendation that is given is that if you are considered in a higher risk group, you have chronic disease, or you work in where you have a lot of exposure, this is something that you should consider to take in consultation with your physician, of course. The reason why they do not say that you should not receive the vaccination is similar to what Dr. Augenbrunn was saying in the beginning. Because of the type of the mRNA vaccine, the way it works, we do not expect for it to have negative effects on the pregnant person, on the fetus, or even in the future when you expect to have a pregnancy in the near future. And the first question that we're asked is, well, how do we know? Unfortunately, right now, there were not testing on pregnant women, but they did do some testing, at least for the Moderna, on animal testing, and there was did not show any effects on the pregnancy or effects on the growing fetus and baby there and the conceptious thereafter.
Okay. What about children? If I have young children, can they receive the vaccine?
So as far as, and anybody can correct if I'm wrong right now, it is just approved for those who are 16 and above and 17 and above. So really the best way to protect our children is for, if we are deemed high risk or in the group that should be vaccinated, is for us to be vaccinated. And I also want to make sure make one more point. In those who are breastfeeding, lactating, the recommendation is if you are recommended in a group to receive, that it is okay and recommended to receive the vaccination. No evidence that it appears in the breast milk.
Thank you. Ms. Winston, if I am a healthcare worker who has been vaccinated, when will the vaccine be available to my family and other members of my community?
Well, thank you for asking that question. We're all anxious, those of us who've taken a vaccine, with that question. We are following guidelines from the New York State Department of Health. So it started off with the vaccine being administered to people who are most exposed to the disease. So that was healthcare workers. If you've paid attention to the news, lately you're hearing how, they're expanding what groups can then be vaccinated. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I would certainly, as quickly as they're moving, I would think, sometime the end of February and March. We have no way of knowing that. We're still vaccinating vulnerable people. And the state is really making sure that these populations have access first to the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. Will family members have to pay out of pocket for the vaccine? And what if they do not have insurance?
Governor Cuomo on December 15th declared that vaccines would be free to all. So there should be no issue with anybody having to worry about having insurance. When it's your time, please go and get the vaccine. But the vaccine is free to all.
Thank you. Dr. Salafu, if someone had COVID-19 and has antibodies, do they still need to take the vaccine?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I'm so happy that everyone is here. This is a very serious disease. Yesterday, there were 230,000 people infected, newly infected, and yesterday there were almost 4,000 deaths. And there's really no way to approach this problem. So I think the vaccines are really the solution to this pandemic. But getting specific to your question, the idea is to create memory so that if you encounter the virus at another time, your memory can actually respond very quickly, not necessarily the antibodies themselves. So because of that, the CDC hasn't prevented people who have had the infection from getting the vaccine, except you have to wait for 90 days. And the reason for the 90 days is because, the immune system is still responding. It hasn't reached its plateau yet. So you want the immune system to actually quieten down a little bit before you get your vaccination. And again, there is no evidence that there's hyper-immunity after you get your vaccine after 90 days. And the idea, again, is to create memory. So long-term memory is what we're looking for. With time, the antibody level will actually go down, and that's just natural for all antibodies. If there is no, stimulation of the immune system, the antibody level goes down with time. But the memory doesn't go away. The memory always stays behind, so that when you encounter the virus next time, your body is better equipped to fight the virus. So the better the immune system is equipped with memory, the better you are in terms of fighting the disease next time.
Dr. Salafu's sound went off.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Whoops. Something.
Did you hear the last piece? You heard the last piece of it. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Salafu, do I need a negative COVID-19 test before I take the vaccine?
Well, the whole idea of the vaccine to actually get everybody vaccinated, so it doesn't really matter whether you are, positive or negative. So there's really no screening involved in deciding whether you should get the vaccine or not. So you don't have to get a negative COVID test, or you don't even have to get a test at all in order to get the vaccine. The only, condition, published by the CDC is if you are actively infected, you wait for the 90 days. Other than that, there is no screening whatsoever required for you to get the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. Can I avoid taking the vaccine if I boost my immune system by taking vitamin D and vitamin C? Do I still need to take the vaccine then?
Okay, so in the general public and in Dr. Google, you actually see these things in there, and everybody's excited. I'll take this and I'll take that and I'll boost my immune system. But the issue here is memory. We want the body to remember COVID-19. It's memory. So those things don't create memory in the body. The body would never remember COVID-19 with vitamin D or vitamin C or whatever you take to boost your immune system. That is the difference, okay? So the answer, yes, is no. The answer to that question is no. You have to get the COVID-19 vaccine to create memory for COVID-19. Very specific.
Okay, thank you. Now we have 180 people in our chat, and we're going to try to handle as many of the questions as possible. What you should know is that we will be having future sessions, and we will respond to those questions that we may not be able to get to at future sessions. So, to begin, the question is, can SARS-CoV-2 by itself complicate or further complicate underlying or pre-existing health conditions such as asthma, COPD, diabetes, etc.? So one of our panelists can take that question.
Mike, you want to shoot, or I can shoot?
I mean, I obviously, people who have underlying conditions, many of which are very common in our community, are at highest risk for developing complications of COVID infection. And these things work synergistically, so somebody has chronic pulmonary disease, or somebody has bad congestive heart failure, and they get coronavirus, then their clinical condition deteriorates, their breathing deteriorates. Sometimes it's hard to tease out how much is contributed by the congestive heart failure and how much is contributed by the coronavirus. But I would say, yes, it is sort of a synergistic package.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add a little bit to that? Which is the long term, right? Long term, we're trying to figure out what happens after you recover from COVID infection, right? COVID damages the lungs, it damages the heart, it damages the kidneys, and there might be GI, residual effects of the, COVID infection, COVID-19 infection. Now, there is really no literature right now that we can cite on the long term, but we also suspect that there is some long-term sequelae, especially, cardiac sequelae. That data will probably come out, over time, and when we get it, we'll share it. In our own experience, we've had a number of patients who got AKI in the hospital. The AKI the acute kidney injury never really went away when we saw them in clinic. So it's there. So there is some, experience around that area where you have probably acute issues. They don't go away completely. They turn into chronic issues, and we don't know exactly how to measure them. But I think in the future, we are going to be able to measure those chronic effects like COPD, as the lung diseases, the heart diseases, the heart failure, the kidney diseases. As a matter of fact, we have a long-term plan at Downstate. When we finished the acute phase in June, we actually had a clinic to follow these patients for long-term, but because of logistics, we had to merge it with the primary care clinics. But we are still following the data, and we should have the data to share in the future.
Okay, thank you. What are the recommendations for persons with severe allergies carrying the EpiPen for emergencies?
People with that, the only people that are recommended not to take this vaccine on the basis of allergies are people who have known severe allergies to a component in the vaccine, which are very few people. So it's encouraged that everybody take this. There are really no restrictions in terms of allergic history.
Okay, thank you. I had COVID asymptomatic, developed antibodies, but recent tests showed no more antibodies. I'm told antibodies are in the cell. What value is it to take the vaccine?
I can answer this. And as Dr. Salifu mentioned earlier, that even if you have an antibodies for the vaccine in the past, that doesn't prevent from getting the vaccine. Eventually, yeah, every single person should take the vaccine as long as they didn't have an infection in the last 90 days. But having positive antibodies or negative antibodies with previous infection doesn't prevent, or it should always consider taking the vaccine.
Okay,
Can I add something to that? All antibodies are not created equally, and people should be aware of that. The vaccines, our bodies make many different antibodies to many different targets, and the vaccines are effective because they produce antibodies to a specific Achilles heel of the virus. Some tests don't pick that up, and some tests test for other antibodies. So you have to be very cautious about over-interpreting antibody tests to mean that you don't need to take the vaccine.
And also, nobody knows how long the immunity gonna last after infection with COVID-19. It could be a few months, it could be longer, it could be shorter. So it's not very clear. There's not that much data.
Okay. Thank you. I received 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, but my symptoms following the second dose were much more intense. Is there any difference in terms of what is contained in the first dose compared to the second dose?
No.
Okay.
Simply no. I mean, you know, reactions, we all feel that reactions are some manifestation of our bodies developing the proper immune response.
Exactly.
And, you know, you've primed the system once, you've confronted it again. It's not that surprising sometimes that you'd have more of a reaction on the second go around, but the components are basically the same.
Okay. Will Downstate have sufficient doses for our second doses of the vaccine?
So we receive our shipment from the New York City Department of Health, and they have confirmed on several occasions that we will be receiving our second doses as scheduled. So the Moderna vaccine needs to be given 28 days after the first dose, that's the second dose, and the Pfizer vaccine needs to be given 21 days after the first dose. So we have been told we will receive our second doses as scheduled.
Is it possible to open an appointment for our spouse and kids before we start taking the general public? This would help in reducing the possibility of our families from contracting the disease.
So we are not planning at this time to open up to the general public. We are a small hospital. We don't have facilities to do vaccination within our facilities. And additionally, we are not in a position to start vaccinating family members.
Okay. Could previous downstate employees get the vaccine here? So you've answered that question, right? So the answer is
no longer affiliated with Downstate. We do not have the ability to do that. If they are continue to be affiliated in some context, we will provide vaccination. So people like emeritus staff can receive the vaccine, but if they've left the facility and gone elsewhere, we cannot vaccinate them.
okay. Thank you. There are several questions, by the way, about the Pfizer second vaccine. I will not read those because I think you've adequately responded to that. What is the difference between Moderna and Pfizer, and why do they offer different side effects?
So I think Dr. Augenbrown answered that. I'll let him answer again.
Yeah, I think we sort of touched on that. The differences are really minor. The target material that's produced by the messenger RNA is slightly different, but it's essentially the same component of the virus. And the material that's used to ferry the mRNA to the cell before it gets degraded is also slightly different, but in effect, these are very similar vaccines. The side effect profiles are really not that different.
Okay. I think you partially answered this. A family member is a professor at another university. The teachers union listed Downstate as a location to sign up and get the vaccine, but when they tried to sign up, it says no appointments available.
So we are only vaccinating teachers who are affiliated with our school-based clinics.
Okay.
We are not in a position to vaccinate teachers citywide.
Thank you. Do I need to take the flu vaccine if I already took the COVID vaccine? If yes, should it be far apart?
I can answer that question. Yeah, definitely flu vaccine, it's highly recommended. Confusion between flu and COVID symptoms is a major problem, and having a co-infection of flu and COVID is also another major problem and can worsen complications as well. So yeah, it is highly recommended to take the flu vaccine, even if you took or if you're planning to take a COVID vaccine. And we recommend that not to take both vaccines at the same time. I would suggest, and Dr. Ogenbrown, if you want to add on anything on this, but I would suggest maybe a couple of weeks in between, or 1 to 2 weeks in between the two vaccinations.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the recommendations are that you should try to separate, at least by 2 weeks, other vaccines from the COVID vaccine. And that's not felt to be because there's some sort of combined negative effect of two vaccines. As a matter of fact, we give vaccines together all the time. I think the issue is that given the fact that this is a new vaccine and we want to be cognizant of any potential side effects, we don't want to sort of muddy the waters with the potential side effects from another vaccine. But as we get more comfortable with this vaccine, I suspect you'll see more use of it in conjunction with other vaccines.
Okay. Does the Johnson & Johnson vaccine have the same side effects as Pfizer and Moderna?
I don't think any of us have really seen too much about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I'm sure it will have many similar side effects, as is true for most vaccines. Again, arm pain, Dr. Berger referenced this, arm pain, fever, aches and pains, fatigue. But I don't think we've really thoroughly been allowed to see the data at the moment. So.
Okay. Should we find out our antibody titer after completing both doses of the vaccine?
I would like to answer this. Definitely not, because even the antibodies we look for the infection of COVID-19 are not the same. It will not be the same antibodies, because as Dr. Ogenbrown mentioned earlier, this is a novel vaccine process which is targeting a certain mRNA, a certain protein in the virus, which will not be checked by the regular antibodies for COVID-19.
Can I wait for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? And that's a big question everybody has.
You could do whatever you like. I mean, nobody's mandating these vaccinations, and certainly I think people could conceivably wait. But we have product here now, and we have to, I will say, we have to act swiftly. We have to act in a timely fashion. The problem is now we continue, as Dr. Salafou said, to have patients who are hospitalized, people in our community who are dying. I think that it's incumbent on each of us to sort of examine our concerns and our fears and try to come to grips with what the public health emergency is really like. So I would encourage people, I understand people being on the fence about this, but I would encourage people to try to make a decision about it. I don't think you're going to get much clarity from the release of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
And just to magnify what Dr. Ogenbrown said, we have no idea when the FDA is going to approve the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And once it's approved, we have no idea what the distribution is going to be. So in terms of the access, other places that haven't gotten Pfizer may get Johnson & Johnson. We really don't know how it's going to be rolled out and where it's going to go and what the access is going to be. We have Pfizer vaccine. We are quickly running out. We've been asked to provide vaccine to some other providers who are also giving out vaccines to their people. So if we don't take the vaccine here at Downstate within the next week, it's very likely that our ability to provide first doses is going to go down significantly.
I want to add something to that, which is that these two vaccines, the Moderna and then the Pfizer, they are basically in the high 90s in terms of effectiveness. It's 95 and 95 point something and 94 point something. I mean, it is very hard to actually achieve anything in modern medicine with that sort of high rate. So even if the Johnson & Johnson comes out, I'm not sure it's going to be 100%. It's probably going to be in that range.
Actually, the study, Mauro, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
On that point, the J&J vaccine, what I saw this morning is that it's about 80% effective. So
there we go. There we go. So he just answered my question. So the 94, 95% is a very, very high rate. So I think we got a first good vaccine to start with. So I just want to let everybody know that.
Okay. Can a person who received the COVID-19 vaccine contract SARS-CoV-2?
Yeah, as Dr. Salihpour mentioned, that the efficacy rate is 95 or 94%. So there is a small chance that recipients could contract the virus. The efficacy is not 100%. And also, there are some cases where the recipient got the vaccine, but they were exposed to COVID just a couple of days before, and they might actually develop the COVID-19. And that just to make sure that this is not because of the vaccine. Most likely that the recipient got or exposed to COVID before they got the vaccine, 2 days before they got the vaccine.
So if you look at the Moderna data, there were about, I think, 11 patients in the group that got the vaccine out of almost 20,000 that did get COVID. However, none of the patients that got the Moderna vaccine in that study developed severe COVID, requiring respiratory support. That is really critical. So to me, that suggests that it's 100% effective. Because really what we're worried about is not just getting sick, but getting severely sick and potentially dying from COVID. And so it's almost 100% effective, and that's both the Moderna as well as the Pfizer vaccine.
Okay, thank you. If I get the Moderna vaccine and get a headache, can I take, I'm sorry, it jumped, Sumatriptan that I usually take for my migraines?
Yeah, I don't think there's any, I mean, I'm not sure I heard exactly what the medication was, but I don't think there's any contraindication to taking standard medications with these vaccines at all.
Okay, it's Sumatriptan.
Yeah, no, there's nothing. There's nothing regarding that. People should be prepared to take whatever medications they take for whatever conditions they're being treated for.
Okay, if I currently take steroids for asthma, and if I currently should I get the vaccine if I currently take steroids for asthma and have COVID antibodies?
Well, people who are immunocompromised or on immunocompromising medication can safely take the vaccine if that's one of the questions buried in there. This is not a lie. I know, people are aware that we don't recommend live virus vaccines, for example, to people who are on who have immunocompromising conditions or are taking immunosuppressants, obviously we think that taking immunosuppressants could put you in jeopardy of acquiring infection and severity of infection. The thing we don't really know is how immunocompromising conditions or immunosuppressants might affect your response to the vaccine. That's something of an unknown. But since we feel that the vaccines are relatively safe and there's some protective effect, people who fit those categories should still take the vaccine. And the antibody question, I think, has sort of been dealt with already. Unless there's been illness in the very recent past, people should not depend on those tests to determine whether they should take the vaccine or not.
Okay. Could someone with...
Can I add a little bit to that?
Sorry.
Just a little bit. So if you are receiving steroids, which is basically immunosuppressing your system, like Dr. Hogenbrand said, likelihood is that your response to your initial infection or exposure was not adequate. That is actually a more reason to get the vaccine, because you now have to actually have a higher dose of vaccine in order to get, because your immune system is already on the lower side, it's suppressed. You need a higher dose of the vaccine in order to stimulate those cells to actually respond and create the memory. So this is actually a good reason to have the vaccine.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. Are there any contraindications for the vaccines with having cancer treatment within the last year? There are two questions on this. One person is asking about leukemia, and one person is asking about just cancer. And the medication for one is RITUXIMAB. The other person is asking about IMATINIB. And that person is saying for CML leukemia.
Again, I think it's the same issue that we mentioned before. I don't think one of the things we've traditionally been concerned about with vaccines is the use of live virus vaccines in people who are on immunosuppressants. I think it's self-evident why that might be a concern. This is not a live virus vaccine. There is no live virus here. And as I said earlier, the material that is administered to an individual does not get into the DNA in the individual. So we don't think that there's any contraindication for a cancer therapy patient to receive these vaccines. I would say on the flip side of that, as again has been alluded to, people who have cancer and are on immunosuppressives are at a higher rate of potentially acquiring infection and suffering severe and adverse outcomes. And so I think in some ways it makes it even more urgent that folks like that get vaccinated.
Exactly.
Okay, there is someone who is persistent on this question. Was mRNA vaccine ever used in humans before? And how do we know there are no significant long-term side effects?
The answer to the question is no. To my knowledge, there have been no mRNA vaccines that have been released to the public. There has been work around mRNA vaccines for probably at least 10 years. So people have participated in trials using these products, and there haven't been any kind of long-term sequelae. But the truth of the matter is that we introduce new medications and vaccines all the time, and it's problematic to say that we're going to have to wait a year, 2 years, 5 years to wait and see if there are complications. I think in most vaccine cases, you're really looking at complications from the vaccine within a 2-month period of time related to the vaccine. We don't really also have the luxury of waiting 5-10 years to see what's going to happen now. This problem is with us right now. The risks of complications long-term are exceedingly low. This is the game that we have available to us right now. So people have to take advantage of this.
Actually, I would like to add that researchers from the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease in Maryland knew from their research in the past on MERS and SARS that it was the best to tune the RNA sequence to stabilize the resulting spike protein. So it's not a novel concept of a vaccine. It's been looking at for like 20 years.
Okay, the schedule is only showing dates up to tomorrow, Friday, 1/15/21, to schedule to take the vaccine. Will there be any other scheduled dates past tomorrow to administer the vaccine?
Yes, there will. We schedule vaccines based on how much is available. And as we move forward, there will be sometimes when you look and there's no room, just check the next day because this is a very fluid scheduling process.
Thank you. Please put in perspective the inherent risks frontline workers assume who choose to wait for more evidence rather than receive the vaccine. And I think you all were pretty much discussing that this is a very serious problem now.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to interject, we've had, and I've raised this issue on other town halls before. We have lost several colleagues here in this institution alone, and we've had other colleagues who've gotten sick, and to this point haven't fully recovered from this. So I think this is a real and personal problem that we are confronted with. So the vaccine offers some protection. I'm thankful for having it available.
Yeah, and let's look at what's going on in the general population. It's not just a matter of being frontline workers. In New York State now, 7.2% of the population is testing positive for COVID. Yesterday, 4,000 people in the United States died of COVID. This has not gone away. It has diminished a little in our local community, but this is out there and it's not going away. And the only way you can protect yourself is being vaccinated. And the only way you can protect your loved ones and everyone you're around is if you get vaccinated, and when it's their turn, they get vaccinated. You can wait, but your risk is not any different than it was 6 months ago or 9 months ago. You still are at risk of getting COVID. And if you're traveling in public and you're interacting with the public, and even if you're home and members of your family are out and about, they are at risk of bringing COVID home to you. So to ask what the risk is, it's no different than it was previously. And 4,000 people died yesterday of COVID in the United States.
Yeah, I would just echo that thought. In locally, I think when I look at the DOH data, we lose about 250 to 300 people in New York City alone every day to COVID deaths. And a lot of the significant transmission seems to be occurring in the home, people who are in close proximity to somebody who's infected. So again, I think one has to consider your risk for acquiring infection in the workplace, but then potentially if that were to happen, your risk of bringing that home. And if you have immunocompromised family members living with you or elderly family members living with you, that's a serious risk. And I think all of us have to examine our situations in that light.
I'd just like to add a comment. I understand people's anxiety about taking the vaccine, about taking any medicine or whatever they don't understand. I have family members who have that issue, but we're asking you to please listen to this evidence, do your own research, and really consider getting the vaccine. Some of you are thinking, well, I don't have COVID. I could get the vaccine and die, or I could get the vaccine and do whatever. We've shown you in our community that we're taking the vaccine and you see the reactions. Please consider it because COVID is killing people and we need to take this vaccine to protect each other and our loved ones.
Thank you. Now, there's a person who keeps asking this question. I'm going to interpret what they're saying. If you tested for COVID-19, and I believe they're saying if you are positive but asymptomatic and you receive the vaccine, will there be some negative consequences since the 90-day wait will not have happened? So I'm assuming the person is tested, they're asymptomatic. Do they go and do they still have to wait for the 90 days?
The reason that the 90 days is recommended is because natural immunity produces antibodies. It's felt to be almost like an immunizing process, so that you produce antibodies. So in the acute phase of that infection, receiving the vaccine itself might not be of much benefit, although again, the long-term residua of immunity is unclear. So we do say after 90 days, you should probably get that. I will say that one of the caveats there, though, is that, and you mentioned that if you're asymptomatic, it seems pretty clear that if you have symptoms, if you have symptomatic disease, you're more likely to produce a brisk antibody response. If you're asymptomatic, the natural antibody response is probably somewhat muted. So you have to take that into consideration as well. So you could wait the 90 days. There's really no contraindication physically or medically to taking the vaccine, even within the 90 days.
So they will not be harmed because the person is repeating?
There's no evidence of that.
Okay. Are we being recorded? Yes, we're being recorded, and it will be available, I guess later, either tomorrow or the beginning of next week. Okay. Now, someone is asking a question that was already answered from all of the people that have taken the vaccine here at Downstate. I believe Dr. Berger indicated that there was only one that had a major side effect or a major reaction. Am I correct? Okay.
One person who had a major reaction
to the vaccine. Major.
I also want to say that I think the CDC released recently some information that looked at over about 1 million people receiving the vaccine. I think 10 people had some element of anaphylactic reaction, and that all of them were promptly treated and nobody suffered any kind of significant consequence. Nobody was hospitalized. So I think that that's further proof that this is a pretty safe intervention. If 1 million people can get the vaccine and nobody suffers any kind of severe long-term complications.
Okay. I believe you've answered this also. If I have asthma and allergic reactions to shellfish, seafood, is Moderna the vaccine that I should get?
So I want to comment on that personally because I have asthma. Where's my EpiPen? I have my EpiPen. Here is my EpiPen. I got 2 doses of Pfizer vaccine and had absolutely no issues with it. So, and I think Dr. Augenbraun mentioned it before, it's not allergies in general, it's allergies to the components of what the vaccine is put in.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't had a major reaction to other vaccines in the past, it's highly unlikely you'll have one to this. But one of the things we've done is we have nurses in the vaccination area, and we have the necessary medical equipment present that we can immediately treat anyone who has any sort of allergic reaction.
Thank you. Are previously healthy and successfully vaccinated patients candidates for donation of convalescent plasma, as would someone who had previously contracted COVID?
That's a good question. We don't honestly know right now. It's we presume that people make a lot of antibody and that they might make good candidates for donation of convalescent plasma. But it remains to be seen whether that's true.
That could be a good area for research, maybe.
Okay. Can the results of a COVID test be be impacted? Well, the person is asking, can they result in false positive versus false negative after vaccination? So could a person get a false positive or false negative COVID test result after being vaccinated, and as a result of the vaccination?
This is very tricky, but go ahead, Rami. I wanted to say that the whole idea is to get vaccinated, right? That is the ultimate outcome we're looking for. The ultimate in this pandemic, as in terms of intervention and treatment, is the vaccination. So once that is done, basically you are done. So, and that is what we are saying is 96% effective. So unless you have symptoms or you're reinfected, you have symptoms, there is really no reason to actually get tested again.
But again, the vaccine is not an attenuated virus, so it should not affect the result. It should not give you a false positive.
Exactly.
Okay. Someone is asking about autoimmune disease. Can those with autoimmune disease get it? I'm assuming with the vaccine, is it going to have an impact?
I think that that's a valid concern. I've heard that from people, that they're concerned that perhaps their autoimmune condition would be somehow primed or exacerbated by the vaccine. The current recommendation is, again, that people with autoimmune conditions are at higher risk for complications from COVID. There's no evidence that the vaccine precipitates autoimmune flares. People with autoimmune conditions were included in the clinical trials. There's no data to support that concern. It's a valid concern, but there's no evidence of it.
Okay. Somebody would like more detail on the major reaction that was had by the one person at Downstate. So that was Dr. Burke.
They want information on that patient?
Say that again? They want to know specifically what reaction the person had.
So I don't know specifically, and I'm not sure that's germane to the conversation. They had what was thought to be an anaphylactic reaction. They treated it with self-administered epinephrine, and they responded immediately.
Okay. The same person is asking, so it is safe to say a person who received the COVID-19 vaccine can contract SARS-CoV-2, which can complicate or further complicate underlying or pre-existing health conditions.
I think Dr. Augenbraun answered that.
Dr. Augenbraun answered that question.
Okay, so I think that we've pretty much come to the end of our questions. Should we let people know? I think we've answered really all of the questions and all of the themes. Someone has said, if I scheduled a vaccine next week at Downstate, but now the schedule is showing appointments only up to the 15th. Does that mean we have run past? I think that Ms. Winston already indicated that we should go to the next day or look at further along on the schedule, because it's a fluid situation. If someone lives with one or more persons who have tested positive for COVID, should they be coming to work?
You want to answer that, Mike?
So say that again. If somebody lives with people who have COVID, should they come to work?
Yes.
No. Again, I mentioned this before. We've seen a lot of transmission in households, and we have to assume that if somebody is in the household with other people who have COVID, that if they're not using PPE like we use in the hospital, they have a high risk of having contracted the infection. And we don't want you to come to work possibly exposing other staff members and patients to COVID. What you should do in that circumstance is notify your supervisor that that's occurred. We have a process in the institution for notifying infection control and employee health service so that we can properly analyze the situation and advise you about what you should do, but don't come to work.
Okay, and it says, does the department, we're only going to do this last question, does the department have the right to know if someone at home has tested positive?
The department, meaning the department the person works in?
Yes.
The supervisor.
Yes, supervisor, etc.
Well, I mean, I don't think the department has a right to know something about the health of individuals in your household. But, if you are, again, if you're not coming into work because you're doing the responsible thing and quarantining yourself, you should notify your supervisor. You don't have to tell the supervisor who or how many people in your household might have infection. You don't even have to tell them that you've been exposed to somebody in the household. You can just say somebody I was exposed to has coronavirus, and that's the end of it.
I think that's a very helpful response. We do have a couple more. I think we can take these on, though I think that someone is asking about a vaccine booster shot for the future, but that is for the researchers to discuss. So I think we're at 4 o'clock. Would you like to stop, Dr. Foster, Dr. Lester? Red, it's your side.
Muted.
Volume.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I want to thank all of our panelists and thank all of our employees and workforce for joining us this afternoon. It was a meaningful, rich discussion. We will be following up with any questions that are in the chat that we did not respond to and getting the information out to you as quickly as possible. We will send it out via email through a frequently asked questions format or through our website. And also we will be rescheduling these sessions in the coming weeks as your interest in this information continues. So thank you all for coming. And Dr. Booten-Foster, any closing remarks?
Well, thank you very much. And again, this was meant to provide you with information so that you can make the best decisions for you and your family. As you've heard the panelists say, these are a diverse group of panelists and scientists who have received the vaccine. Over 1 million people in the United States have received the vaccine. So we are encouraging you to consider taking the vaccine. Again, the decision is up to you. In the meanwhile, please continue to wear your mask, wash your hands, maintain social distancing. And we thank you very much for participating in this series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.